All right, so let's do a sample problem that utilizes a list or an array. Use those terms interchangeably because they're kind of working the same way. And what we're going to do is I've pseudo-coded out a problem that we're going to Python code and program. It's called Guess My Number. And the idea behind this, and I suggest that you look over this pseudocode before you watch the rest of the video so you can see what we're trying to accomplish. But the idea behind Guess My Number is that we're going to have the computer generate a guess. We'll have it generate a random number. And then we will create a loop so the user can keep typing in the number until they enter it in correctly, or type it in correctly, or they just might want to quit and get out. So we'll give them the ability to get out of our loop. Write what is your guess. We'll get a guess from our user. If the guess is correct, we will set when to true, so that way we can do something outside of the loop. This break is something that we haven't worked with yet, but we're going to work with now. And the idea behind a break is that it is not going to evaluate anything else. It doesn't care about whether play again is set to Y. Break simply says get out of the loop. Just stop playing the game. Exit this while loop completely. No more evaluation. Just leave at this point and go to wherever you would, whatever code would be executed as soon as the loop was over. So that is a quick escape kind of thing. So if they get the computer guess correctly, just break out of the loop and they're done playing the game. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to store the player's guesses into an array. And so that way we can keep track of whether or not they've already guessed that number. So this else if says is going to look into that array to see if they've already guessed the number. Obviously they've guessed it wrong, or else they wouldn't be in this loop anymore. So if it's in the array, we can say, oh, you've already guessed that one. If it's not in the array, but the number is still incorrect, otherwise they wouldn't be in this portion of the if statement. If it's incorrect and it hasn't already been guessed, then we're going to put their incorrect guess into our array. We're going to increment the number of wrong guesses so that way we can keep track of how many times they guessed incorrectly. And we're not giving them, if they've guessed the same number twice incorrectly, we're not giving them a hit for that, for wrong guesses. So the only wrong guesses we're incrementing is guesses that were uniquely incorrect. And then we will ask them, do you want to guess again? The only time I'm asking them if they want to guess again is in this situation. In other words, you can see that if they guess the number already, I'm not going to ask them if they want to guess again. I'm just going to loop again, and the loop will ask them, so what is your new guess? What is your next guess? So the only time we're asking them or trying to get a play again is if they've guessed incorrectly, uniquely. We're going to ask them if they want to guess again. So those are our conditions in our while loop. Once we exit the while loop, there's two ways we've exited the while loop. One, they guessed correctly and we broke out of it. Or two, they didn't guess correctly, but they chose to not guess again. And so therefore gave us a no and got us out of the while loop. So at that point, we can check to see if when was ever set to true. In other words, I set when to false. I initialized this when to false. The only way that it got set to true is if they picked the correct guess. So if it's true, that means they picked the correct guess, and I'm writing out a response that says, you guessed it correctly in so many guesses. If when was never set to true, they never guessed the right one. They got out of the loop because they said no, they don't want to guess anymore. So here I'm giving them, all right, well, you didn't guess it correctly, but this was the correct, this is what the computer guessed. So at least I give them what they didn't catch. All right, so let's close this out and let's try and pseudocode all that. I suggest you have a copy of that while I'm running through this so the code will help make more sense. I'm not going to keep a copy of it on the screen, but you have it available for you to download so you can be looking at it at the same time. So the first thing I'm going to do is set up those variables that I pseudocoded. So actually what I'm going to do just to save time is I have this someplace else and I'm just going to copy and paste it here Those are just all in the pseudocoding, so there's nothing new about that. That's why it's good to pseudocode ahead of time, so you kind of think about all of these things ahead of time. Okay, remember pseudocoding is a way to make things logically make sense, and then once you logically make sense, it's easier to put it into code. All right, so what I was going to do here was, first thing I'm going to do is just test it. So I'm going to generate the random number. I'm just going to do it between 1 and 10. And then I'm just going to print out the computer guess just so I know that everything is okay up to this point. And already I have a problem, and it's saying that it doesn't understand random. Well, what did I forget to do? I forgot to import random. Okay, so now I'm going to run it again. And so far, everything is working. So I highly suggest that, as I've suggested many times, that you run your code often, so that way if you do get errors, it's easy to see, well, I just added this little bit of code, and so you have a smaller place to look for your errors. So now I know that everything is set up here correctly. I know that my computer, my random integer is working, so I'm just going to get rid of that print statement. Okay, so now let's do just steps at a time. I think the first thing I'm going to do is set up my while loop, so that way I know that's working correctly. So I'm going to set up while play again is equal to y. And let's see, I'm just going to make myself simple for the moment. Play it again. Playing. Maybe I'll do something like that. And then I need to make some kind of condition so I get out of this loop. So I'm not in an infinite loop. So obviously I need to play again is equal to input. I guess it's guess again, but want to guess again. If I look at my pseudocode, something along those lines. And here's where I'm going to add something new. First of all, let's see. So the idea here is, well, let's just run it and make sure that it's working. So do you want to guess again? So if I choose a little y, it will keep playing. Okay, if I choose again, if I put a capital Y, it gets out. So here is something new that is in your Python programming book. We can put this little word at the end of this. And the nice thing about this is what we're doing with the lower method, and I'm saying that because these are in parentheses. You'll learn about that very soon. But I need to have those parentheses. So this dot lower parentheses at the end of my input, what's happening is the input is getting the value. It's then taking that value and making it all lowercase. And so now by forcing my input to be a lowercase, that's going to be put into play again. So the point here is if I run it and I put in a capital Y now, the capital Y is going to be converted to a lowercase y, which is going to be put into play again. And so now when play again makes this comparison, a capital Y has been converted to a lower y. So either of these will now be converted to true, and it should play again. So lower y will also work, but an n will not. All right, so this is a new concept, but that's kind of a cool thing. It makes it easier to compare. So the user might not know to put a capital Y or a lower y. Now you can force either case to be true. All right, so now that I've got my while loop working, what's the next thing I can do? Well, let's see, I've got my computer guessing. So let's start making some comparisons. Now I don't need this playing anymore. Let's start making some comparisons. So the first thing I guess I'll do is I'm going to, it says if, looking at my pseudocode, if guess is equal to the computer guess. So if the user guessed correctly, then we're going to set when equal to true, and we're going to break. Okay, so what that means is get out of the loop, don't keep looping, and exit the while loop. Well, let's just test this one part. So if I were to get out of the while loop, if I look at my pseudocode, I did something like print U1. Okay. Or yeah, whatever. Okay, you guessed it. Let's just do something like you guessed it. Okay. So, but it only prints you guessed it. Well, let's just take this one step at a time. Okay, so let's make the guess true. I'm going to print the guess again. That way I can see what I'm guessing. All right, so let's back up. So I want to print the computer guess so that way I know while I'm developing it if I'm writing my code correctly. So the idea here is I'm going to print out the computer guess so I can see it. I'm going to force myself to guess correctly so that I can see if I break out of my while loop, not be asked, do I want to guess again, and go right to it. Or if I guess incorrectly, it should ask me, do I want to guess again, and keep looping. So let's just start with that. So my guess is 2. The first thing I'm going to do is guess incorrectly, or I guess it's just asking me, do I want to play again? So, oh, I guess I'm not giving myself the ability to input a guess, so that's definitely a problem. Do I want to play again? I'll put no. All right, so I have to give myself the ability to guess. All right, we better do that then. So guess equals, we need to get an integer from our user, right? Because we are checking, we have an integer here with our computer guess. We need an integer here for our user guess, our player guess. So input, what is your guess? Okay. So what is your guess? All right, so now we have a comparison that we can make. All right, so let's run this again. What is your guess? Well, if I guess 6, I should break out of the loop. If I don't guess 6, I should play again. So let's do a 4 and see what happens. It asked me, do I want to play again, which makes sense. This evaluated to false. Do I want to play again? I'll put in a Y. And this time I'm going to guess correctly, which should break me out of my while loop. I shouldn't be asked again. And it'll say, you guessed it. So I'm going to put in a 6. It in fact broke out of my while loop and it printed, you guessed it. Okay. Well, I only want to print you guess it if when is true, right? So let's add that statement. If when, okay, so here's another shortcut, equals true. Okay, so another shortcut you can do is if when. That automatically says if when is true. So that's a shortcut. If when is true, I could put the rest of that equals true, but a shortcut is simply if when. That automatically means if this evaluates to true. So if true, print, you guessed it, else, print, let's just print out what the number was. The number was, and we'll put the computer guess. Okay, so now we've got a little bit more logic. We should test it, run. Okay, so what is my guess? So if I guess correctly, it should say you guessed it. So let's try that. So I'm going to guess correctly. I know that the computer guessed a 3 and I guessed it. So let's try an incorrect statement to verify that the second half of this else statement is working. So I know that a 9 was chosen by the computer. I'm going to choose 4. Do you want to guess again? No, I don't. So that should get me out of my while loop. And the number was 9. So our second half of this if statement was executed correctly. See how I'm building this in parts and making sure that each piece works before I move on? All right, so now that we have this portion of our if statement working, let's get to the next portion. If I look in the pseudocode, the next portion is checking in my array to see if I've already guessed it, but I haven't created an array yet. So let's create the array condition first. So I'm going to do an elif. Well, let's do an else. That's what that pseudocode says. Else, we need to put the incorrect guess into our array. So our array's name is players. Players guesses. Let me just copy and paste so I don't. Our array's name is players. And remember in Python then, to add on that element to our array, we use append, and we're going to append the guess. We only want to ask if they want to play again if they guessed incorrectly. So we'll include that in our else portion. We also wanted to keep track of the number of guesses. So we'll put that here. Plus equals 1 is our shortcut that says whatever was in wrong guesses, add one more to that. And looks like that's part of our pseudocode. So now we've got an else statement that is taking our incorrect guess and appending it to our array. We're keeping track of the number of wrong guesses, and we're asking them if they want to play again. So let's test that portion. So now we're going to guess incorrectly. What is your guess? I'm going to guess a 10. Do you want to guess again? No. All right, so, but I didn't really test to see if my wrong guesses was working. So I think what I'll do is, out of curiosity, just for testing purposes, I'm going to print the number of wrong guesses here. And what I might do is, just for testing purposes, just to make sure that something got appended, I might say print players guesses of 0, just so I can see that something was put into my array. I'm just testing one bit of code at a time. So I'm going to test to make sure that if I guess something incorrectly, was that put into my array? And I know it's not going to because I spelled players guesses incorrectly. There we go. So is there a value that got put into my array? So therefore this line is working. And was guesses actually incremented? Because it started off being 0. So if they guessed wrong, then I should at least have 1. And do I want to play again? So I'm going to make one incorrect guess and see if that's all. What is your guess? I'm going to guess a 9. So it input a 9. Do you want to guess again? I'm going to say no. And if this is all correct, I've got an error. So print wrong guess, name wrong guess is not defined. So it doesn't like this. See how it's helpful just doing this bits at a time? Now it's very easy to track. Oh, you just need to do that. All right, so I misspelled that variable. I'm going to run it again. What is my guess? I'm going to guess incorrectly a 3. Do you want to guess again? No. And now it's saying print wrong guesses. Printed out a 1. That's correct. Print player guesses of 0, which was a 3, which is correct. And the number was 2. So I know that that portion of the code is working. All right. So now I don't necessarily need this. This was just for testing purposes. So I'm going to comment that out. I'd probably erase it if this were mine, but I just want to keep this as a visual for you to see it. Okay, so now we have two conditions working. We have the fact that if they guessed correctly, we're doing something. If they guessed incorrectly, we're doing something. But the third part of that is that we wanted to check to see if they've already guessed it. And the way that we already know if they guessed it is because we've been storing it in this array. So now let's check that condition. So I'm going to use that as the elif. Elif. Okay, so this is kind of a new feature we haven't done yet. It is in one of our prior videos for looking into an array for a particular element. In other words, let me just type this out and then I'll explain it. If guess in player, oops, spell it correctly. Okay. Okay, so what I'm doing here is I'm taking whatever the user guessed, my player guessed a value, and this is the syntax that says, go look in this array, whatever elements are already in that array, and see if this value is in there. So if the player guessed 5, look in our player guesses list or array and see if we put in a 5 in another guess time. So did they guess a 5 already? And if so, let's just say print you already guessed that. and now they will exit the if statement. They'll just be asked to guess again. So that's a little different. We're not asking them, do you want to guess again? We're only asking them if they want to guess again if they've guessed incorrectly and haven't guessed that before. If they've already guessed it, we're simply asking them for their new guess. So this is, again, we are looking whatever value we got from our user, look in our array and see if it exists. In other words, did we put that into our array prior? So let's run that part of our code. So the idea there is if I run it, and let's say, what is your guess? Let's say I guess incorrectly that it's a 5. Ideally, that 5 is getting appended to player guesses because I guessed incorrectly. And I've got an error, so this is good. It doesn't like player guesses. I must have spelled player guesses incorrectly. It says it's on line 26. So I can put my cursor on various lines, and I can look in this bottom right-hand corner. I know that I'm on line 27. So it doesn't like what I've done here. Player guesses is not defined. It doesn't understand what player guesses is. And that is because I probably left out an S. I did. So this is players guesses, and I wrote player guesses. So let's put players guesses. Again, see how important it is to do bits at a time? What is your guess? Well, I'm going to guess incorrectly that it's a 3. So guessed incorrectly means that it got appended to players' guesses. Wrong guesses should have been incremented by 1. It is asking me if I want to play again, and I'm going to say yes. Okay, this time I'm going to guess 3 again, because if that was correctly put into my array, which we tested before that it should have been, we've already tested that it should be working. So now we're testing this part of our code to verify that it's seeing my guess in that array, and if it is, it should print out you already guessed that. So let's try it. So again, I'm going to put 3, and it says, oh yeah, you already guessed that. So I'm doing something, my logic is working. What is your guess? So it came back here and asked me my guess again. This time I will guess, let's guess correctly, 4, and I guessed it, yay. Okay, and so the last part of our pseudocode then is when we guessed it correctly, we wanted to say something like, you guessed in, and then we're going to append, this will be good. We guessed in wrong guesses. Remember, we were tracking how many guesses that they guessed incorrectly, plus, and then guesses. Okay, now let's run that. So now this time we are going to, let's just see what happens. Now we're printing out, let's just talk about what we're trying to do. So now we're just going to test to make sure our wrong guesses worked and that we're printing out how many wrong guesses they made. So let's run that and see what happens. What is my guess? I'm going to guess incorrectly once. I'm going to guess a 1. Do you want to guess again? Yes. And now, and the reason why I'm guessing incorrectly once is I want to make sure that wrong guesses is tracking how many times I guessed wrong. What is my guess? This time I'll guess correctly. I'm going to print an 8. Oh, and I got an error. All right, so type error must be string, not int. Now this is one that comes up fairly often. So I'm just going to bring this to your attention. So the idea here is that in this print statement, it says type error must be string, not int. And so if you recall back from our beginning days, if I have a plus sign, the plus sign can be either one of two things. It either means join some strings together or add some numbers together. It can't be both, it's one or the other. And here we have a string that we're trying to plus sign a number. So remember what I just said, this plus sign is either join strings or add numbers. So here we have a number that we're trying to join to a string, and Python is saying, no, I'm not happy with that. So what we can do is cast this wrong guesses to a string. In other words, we're saying, well, for the moment, treat this, convert this to a string so that we can join them together. And so you won't be frustrated with the fact that we have a string and an integer that are trying to be added together. So now we are joining strings together instead of having that mix of strings and numbers. So now let's see if that works. What is my guess? I'm going to guess incorrectly once. Do you want to play again? Yes, I do. Or guess again. This time I will guess a 2. And yay, I got it now. You guessed it. Your guess is in 1 guesses. Well, guesses is incorrect at the moment, but we'll just deal with this at the short run. All right, what you could do is you could make another if statement that if guess was equal to 1, then just print guess. Otherwise, guess 2. But let's just keep it here. We've got so many ifs at the moment. But anyway, this is what this matches the pseudocode then. And we had some new concepts that we were playing with that I wanted you to see. One concept was that we were looking into our array or our list for a particular value. Here we are adding elements to our array or to our list. And what else did we do? Something else is new is we broke out of our while loop. So we completely bypassed this play again portion and we just broke out of the while loop and came down here to the next statement. And the other thing we did was we converted something to a lower string. So whatever the user put in, we converted to a lower string. So that way our evaluation would be a little bit simpler it was case insensitive. So lots going on here, but hopefully that all makes sense. And we are getting comfortable with how to work with arrays or lists.